Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv. Wolok. My partner in crime, Vasili Gianarakos, was not able to make it. A last-second power outage has kept him out of the game. Unfortunately, we'll have to move on without him today, but I am very excited to welcome back to the show the Flyers writer man himself. I don't even know where I just came up with that, but Bill Meltzer. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Yariv, how you doing?
I'm doing well. And the off season is kicking off. There's going to be a lot to talk about. I'll probably have to ask you to come back on again because I'm sure there's going to be plenty of chaos this off season to discuss. It will not be a quiet off season. I think that's maybe the only predictable thing about it at this point. Before we get started, just want to remind everybody to please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for notifications on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and iTunes, give us a rating there if you can as well. And a shout out to our sponsors, Gym Steaks of 4th and South. Again, they are open next week, May 1st will be their grand reopening after a year and a half off for remodeling from their fire. So they'll be back open. And Summit Public Adjusters, you can reach them at 215-752-0560. All right, let's get into it, Bill. The first bit of news, and this is the one where, I got to say, I spend less and less time on Twitter as I get older. The Ivan Fedotov signing, this has obviously caused a bit of a spur. He gets himself a 2-year, $3.275 per year contract. And that's $3.275 million per year. This one, I think, caught a lot of people off guard to some degree. I think everybody knew he was going to get a multi-year deal. They knew it would probably be above the ELC max. However, this is kind of a substantial number. Now, there's a lot of logic behind this. Again, he's a veteran pro player. He's not, while he's new to the NHL, he's not an ELC player anymore at this point. I mean, he's 27 years old, going on 28. He made a substantial amount of money over in Russia. So coming over here, I'm sure there had to be a deal worked out that, had to make it viable for him. So first question, what are your thoughts on the contract? And then I do want to talk about, expectations.
I think that there's when you look at the contract, you have to look at it from several different points, right?
Sure.
Listen, there's some sticker shock on the cap hit. I had some initial sticker shock on the cap hit, to be very honest.
Yeah.
And then you look at it a little bit closer, and you're absolutely right that this had nothing to do with the 3 games he appeared with the Flyers. This is what was discussed before he even came over. Sure. It was part of the cost of doing business to get him over here to begin with. So that's one piece of it. He would, he'd be an unrestricted free agent this summer. The Flyers would have some competition. Would he have gotten as much? I don't know. Maybe not. But they have enough confidence in him. They've wanted him for a long time, right? Wanted him for at least several years. I think we have to say that you have to take that 3-game sample size and just throw it out the window.
Yeah.
Throughout the window, the relief appearance against the Islanders where he looked incredible for 2 periods, and ultimately the Flyers lost that one in overtime. Didn't even know he'd beaten the game, and so it's all just reaction. You have to throw out that start in Buffalo, and he was not good in that start in Buffalo. No question about it. He didn't play well. Looked a little bit ill-prepared at times. And then you also certainly have to throw out that game in Montreal because no one on the Flyers, I don't care who was in goal that game, that 9-3 game, any goalie the Flyers put out there was going to have an ugly night.
Yeah.
So it's too small of a sample size. Plus, you figure in he had all of 2 practices and then only 1 practice before the 3 games he played. His final practice was after that. With Urson back in net, so 2 practices. Really 1. A couple morning skates and brand new equipment. He hadn't broken in yet. No, I mean it's just you just toss it out. don't worry about those 3 games. It was just a few reps for him, get just a little, just a little taste of what to expect under his belt. So I don't base anything off of that. Um, Part of what's baked into the price here was, according to all indications from what I've heard as well, the Flyers did not want to go 3 years. They wanted a 2-year term. By going to a 2-year term, it increased the cap hit on the deal.
Sure.
You're committing more to him, in exchange for less of a long-term arrangement. So the Flyers are committed to him for 2 years. They do have 1 more year to go on Cal Peterson, of which you can only put you can only bury 1.1 million in the AHL. So that's part of the price tag you're doing that. So he's still carrying about 4 million, 3.9. So that's part of for year 1. But Sam Ersson did not get, he got a raise, right? But not a huge raise. Not for a guy who plays as many games as he did. He probably, had that deal been negotiated this offseason, it probably would have been higher.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't figuring on playing as many games as he did. No one knew what was going to happen with Carter Hart at that point in time. If or when something might go down. And when you look, when you look at cap expenditure, you really look at what's your total spending at a position. So it's not just Fedotov, it's not just Ersson, the piece that you owe, the piece you owe to Peterson. It's really how much you're spending at that position. Fedotov, and deservedly so. Deservedly, he's making less than Carter Hart was making last year. But when you take what because they'll owe the same to Peterson they owed this past year, right? They'll owe a little bit more to to Ersson, and less to Fedotov than Hart made last year. So when you look at what the Flyers spent on goaltending this year versus next year, it's really about the same.
Mm-hmm.
So from that regard, I think you can understand a little bit more when you look at it that way.
Sure.
Now that being said, he's completely unproven, right? There are definitely adjustments he's going to have to make in a number of ways. He's someone who wants to adapt, who wants to fit in, who wants to learn. Even something like that he came over immediately doing his interviews in English, even though it's he understands English, but his communications it's basic. But even within 2-3 weeks, it was already more confident and getting better. Sure. I would think by the end of next season, he'd be really comfortable speaking English. I was surprised his English skills are as good as they are because he hasn't really had time to practice them in a lot of years.
It's not normal for Russian players to come over and just start
to come over speaking any English, right? So he's been a little bit of a late bloomer in the KHL and a little bit of a late bloomer internationally. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. There's no guarantees. It's definitely a question mark. But I think there's potential there to have a good 1A, 1B or a starter backup kind of arrangement. I think he deserves the opportunity. And you have Kolosov in the pipeline too.
Sure.
Might not be ready to start the year. If you get to midseason and Kolosov is just cleaning up in the American League and Fedotov is struggling, Flyers might make that decision. You know what? He's ready to bring him up now. So things change whenever you assess a team. It changes throughout a season. It's one of the things I said for the Flyers this season. Like they weren't expected to make the playoffs. Then you get to midseason and into the stretch drive, and the expectations change because the Flyers were there. It's the same thing every year. So go into the season that way. Hopefully everyone stays healthy, and then reassess if you need to as you go along. And a 2-year commitment is not really a long-term commitment. It goes by quickly.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of everybody's kind of conditioned to be disappointed here almost in a way. Like we've kind of done this before in some degree, like you're a Pita, right? There's Roman Chekmanik, which is actually a success story,
Yeah.
right, of an older goaltender coming over and getting himself a nice contract. But I think there's a hint where people are already, and not that you're doing this, but I'm listening to other podcasts. It's like, oh, they give him, it's like, oh, he deserved it. I'll be honest with you, I can't see an NHL team being like, oh, you deserve the money.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a risk. I don't think I think they are legitimately high on him to a degree. I don't think they see him as, the end all be all. I think
No.
they would have said that publicly, but I definitely think that he is at least somewhat worth that money. Otherwise, I don't think they would have made this deal. I don't think they would have even tried to get him over because they could have just waited the season out, right? They
Right.
didn't go out and get a free. They're not talking about getting free agent guys in there. They want to go through this process. They have to be somewhat high on him to give him this kind of price tag and a 2-year contract. Like he didn't even get that when he was initially coming over here. So they must have seen enough from him over his play overseas, where majority of us have not seen him play, to warrant at least somewhere around this amount of money. And people, I heard like a lot of names like bringing Stolars in, a lot of these guys that people saw have success around the league that maybe we gave up on at one point. But this guy is 27 years old. He is kind of entering that legitimate entry point into the NHL where most goalies kind of enter. It's not really around 22 like what Carter
Yeah.
Hart was doing at 21. It's typically like around 25, 26, 27 years old. So I do kind of think that they thought that this was worth the risk and can't be that high of a risk to the team. They must at least see him as a definite NHL goalie, which I agree with you. You got to throw the 3-game sample size out. It doesn't seem logical to judge a guy off those 3 because you could have theoretically over that same time frame, you could do the same thing to Ersson.
Yeah.
Look at those 3 games played; those numbers would have been terrible, and he wouldn't have been warranted a contract, right? But he wasn't there for when the team was playing really well either in front of him. So I am interested to see how this plays out when he has an actual off season and whatnot. Um, so that kind of goes to the next question. Like, how do you kind of see this season? Was it a success for the Flyers? And then, I guess compound that with you know, Philadelphia has a tendency to kind of give a coach 1 year. You get 1 year, and then after that, you're already on the chopping block. You see this in pretty much every sport, sometimes warranted, other times unwarranted. And already, like I am seeing, though, Tortorella completely lost the room. They got to get rid of him. They got to promote him. Whatever. I'm seeing that rise. It's nothing that surprising, but to me, overall, the season was humongous success. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. They exceeded expectations. The young players, progressed in the way they were supposed to. It's not perfect. There are some feathers being ruffled, but I kind of see that as all part of the process. Even the situation with Sean Couturier, it's like, okay, but he had a situation with Morgan Frost, and nobody's talking about that anymore, too. Like things kind of progress and have a chance to get better. So I kind of see it as that. Now, if it continues to go in the opposite direction, then yeah, then I think that conversation can be had. But I think we have to give him a little more time to kind of work through his team and do what he does. But what do you think about the season, and where do you kind of see Tortorella, stance now? Because at one point mid-season, I mean, the guy could do no wrong publicly.
Yeah. I would say that, first of all, the biggest things that they did this season were they absolutely fixed the penalty kill,
Yeah.
right? Flyers went from towards the bottom of the league to they hit a rough patch, unfortunately, late in the season. But still, they were top 4 and led the league by a wide margin in shorthanded goals. That helped make up for some of the deficiencies in the power play. Honestly, they had 15 shorthanded goals, which led the league by several.
Mm-hmm.
So that piece of it was really good. In terms of implementing structure, taking away the middle of the ice, and killing a lot of those plays from the corner that were killing them a year ago. Now, late in the season, during that 8-game winless streak, all of a sudden everything, all the structure just collapsed for for a number of games. Not even every game. Like I thought the Buffalo game, they couldn't score, which is probably a bigger issue. But structurally, they were good in that one. It was really the loss to Chicago, the 2 losses to Montreal, loss to Columbus really hurt. and those were games where their structure fell apart on them. So that was, but you have to take the bigger picture, and even look at the games against the Rangers, the Devils, and that final game, which was 1-1 in the third period. They got back on top of their structure, and they looked a lot more like the team they were earlier in the season. And I think that you have to fairly give Tortorella a piece of the credit for that, and a significant piece of the credit, because that's what he does. He's very good. He's very good at structure. So I think all those things, Torts deserves some credit for. Now I will say that I think Torts had quite a few missteps down the stretch. Some of it was just in the. So and I'll tell you what I think the mistakes were. Even now, there was a little bit of a communication gap with Sean Couturier and John Tortorella. I didn't like, that. I mean, I don't know. I have dealt with Sean Couturier since the day he was drafted in 2011. I've never known him to complain. I've never known him to be anything other than self-motivated, highly competitive. He's not typically someone who complains about a lack of communication. If he's complaining about a lack of communication with the coach, my tendency is to believe Couturier, because I've had so many years of dealing with, and of other people around the team. So I don't think that Tortorella handled that as well as he could have and should have. And compounding that, truthfully, on the day that he scratched his captain, which is a big deal. You don't often see a captain scratched, most especially a guy who was just named captain a couple weeks earlier. I think John Tortorella made a huge mistake setting out assistant coaches for most of the next week to, you have to talk. I don't care if you don't want to talk, you have to.
I agree.
So I think that was a mistake. I think that Torts made a mistake after the Chicago game, because the first question that was asked to John was, do you feel that after that 7-game gauntlet against top teams, you didn't have the team prepared to play against the Canadiens and the Blackhawks? And Torch shot that right down. The 2 sentences. He said, preparation was not an issue. Our team was ready to play. Okay? Now, you fast forward to that Islanders game, where afterwards he was not a happy man, and with some justification, I might add, because that second period was atrocious in that game. But ultimately, you come back to the Flyers came back in the final 10 seconds of that game. They found a way to get a point out of it, take it to overtime. I don't know if that's the game to throw your team under the bus, right? I think you can emphasize that you weren't happy with the second period, but ultimately, you kind of reeled it back in. I don't think it's a time to question anybody's guts. I don't think it's time to question, because if the team was going out there and in games like against Boston, right? The overtime loss against Carolina, they played a really good game. The overtime loss against the Rangers, they played a really good and gutsy game, right? Mm-hmm. If you have guts and you're able to hang in with those top teams, it's not a question of guts, right? You have guys that have really kind of stepped up over some pretty tough stretches of the season. I thought that was hitting the wrong note. And then, then towards maybe 48 hours later, says his frustration with himself was he didn't have the team ready to play the last few games, right? Complete 180 from what he said after the Chicago game. And on one hand was damage control, but I also think he realized that, listen, if I'm criticizing the team, I have to show a little self-accountability here. And I think he corrected it. He did take things on, and he reiterated during the offseason, but things like that, you can only do that so many times, right? Because you also add into that the thing with Felix Sandstrom. Again, all he had to say that night was, all right, the effort was there. It wasn't Felix's night. And everybody knows he wasn't going to go back to Felix again for good reason, right? Because Felix didn't give him a chance to win. But I think rather than literally not answering and walking away, you just say what you said the next night, and he did apologize for it. But again, you can only walk things back so many times, And I felt that all these things with the assistants talking, with the Couturier thing, with the thing with Felix, with the comments after the Islanders game, I thought these are all distractions the Flyers did not need around them at that time of year.
That's fair.
So, I don't think John covered himself in glory late in the season. I just don't. But when you look at his job on the whole of the season, I thought he did a good job. He implemented the structure that they needed. He was able to get on a better page with certain players. In the case of Cam York, because he came into the season not even, by his own admission, not even sure in his mind that Cam York was an NHL defenseman. Tortorella spent a significant part of last year trying to provoke a confrontation with York, because Tortorella believes, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, he believes that confrontation with a player can get you to a better place. And York just wouldn't take the bait. He wouldn't bite on it. And this year, he just had to accept, based on York's play, you know what? He's plenty motivated. There's fire within him. I just leave him alone. That's the best way I can deal with him. I think learning to deal with different players different ways according to their personality type and whatever is part of an evolution of a coach. And he showed an ability to come to a different place. In Frost's case, although he did bench him for the final 30 minutes of the final game, which I didn't think was a great move when you need offense. But put that aside, I think Tortorella going Frost going into Tortorella's office and advocating for himself and talking things out, until those final 10 games of the season where really nobody was very good. That includes Morgan. He wasn't very good in those final 10 games overall, but he had company. But during that stretch from January 6th, really through that Florida game, that weekend, the weekend back-to-back against Boston and Florida, in the Florida game, Anthony Stolarz just kind of stole that game. He was great.
Yeah.
But then after that was when the slide started and nobody was really producing. I mean, TK produced two of those final three games, big game in Madison Square Garden, shorthanded goal against the Devils, which you needed him to do. What might have been nice a little bit earlier in some of those other earlier games in that stretch, but I think he was playing through some stuff and finally was starting to get healthy towards the end. But at any rate, he got a lot more out of Frost in the second half of the season. And I think some of that was, whether it was confrontation or whatever, they got to a better space. Hopefully that continues. So I think when you take the body of work as a whole, it was a success. I do think there's some areas he's going to have to watch going into next season. I don't think distractions and drama is what the Flyers need. I really don't.
100%
that's going to require, that's going to require, I think, a little further evolution, maybe with occasional restraint from Torts. That's maybe not always his strongest suit, because he tends to speak his mind in the moment. But I think on the whole, I don't think the team quit on him. You do have a unified group in the room, and I don't think there's any kind of a mutiny or anything like that. You just have to be careful to maintain and build some relationships a little further going forward. But in terms of establishing a way that the Flyers need to play, and this will be my final point on this, when you look at the season as a whole, with the exception of the Nashville Predators, Flyers beat every team in the NHL. They beat 30 to 31 teams in the league at least once, and even against Nashville, they were 0-1-1. So they had a regulation tie and could have won another one in overtime or a shootout. So you have teams that win Stanley Cups. You have 105-point teams that don't beat everyone in the league at least once in a given year, right? For example, Flyers beat Vancouver twice. So so that's a pretty impressive feat, particularly for a team that was kind of a bubble team. And I think that's that to me showed that if they play a certain way, they can compete with anybody on a given night. Different when you get to the playoffs, right? Different than winning a playoff series. But
yeah, very.
So I think it was a season of progress overall.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really well stated, and I guess well, we got time for one more question here before you got to go, and Bill's going to be covering the Phantoms game for the Flyers website and everything like that, so he's going to have to drop off earlier. But my last kind of segment here, and I think these are kind of melded together. Obviously, the power play was
Yeah.
a disgrace to some degree. It's been really bad. I actually would say it's probably even worse this year than it was in the prior years, just because it was momentum draining almost every single game.
Yeah.
Um, my thought is, what does the offseason look like for the Flyers? Where do they focus? And do you believe that fixing the power play internally is a viable option for them, which is what they stated they are going to do? I will preface that, you brought up the penalty kill. They did improve that internally. It was already better than the power play, but they went from like 20 some, I forget what it was, maybe it was 23rd in the league,
Yeah. Yeah.
to at one point they had the best penalty kill in the league. And look, I really like the addition of Paling and Hathaway, but they didn't do that just because of those players. They did it because they made the proper adjustments internally. Those guys are good penalty killers, but they're also not the best in the league. They did get Couturier back, other things like that, but they definitely did it as an internal improvement because a lot of the players that did really well in the penalty kill were already here in the prior season as well. So, do you kind of see the power play being resolved, and what do you kind of see their focus on in the offseason?
I think they can make incremental improvements
Yeah,
on the power play. Um, I think it's unfair to pin it all on Rocky Thompson because this problem predated Rocky.
sure.
Um, the Flyers were 12.6 2 years ago. Now this year was the worst power play percentage in franchise history. There's nowhere to go but up, right? Before this, the worst was the inaugural 67-68 season. They were 12.3.
You got to go way
That,
back.
that was a brand new expansion team.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's nowhere to go but up. Obviously, yes, they need more talent, right? That's a piece of it. But to me, when you look around the league, right, were the Flyers the least talented team in the NHL this
No,
year? No, they weren't, right? When you look at the San Jose Sharks, do you look at that team and say, boy, we wish we had their talent,
right.
right? You don't. Do you look at the Seattle Kraken and go, boy, we wish we had their talent? Clearly not, right? But yet both had power plays that were over 20% this year. It's not something that's not doable. I mean, a lot of it is making simple plays, making them consistently. Um, you know, uh, Getting more pucks to the net. You don't. I think a lot of times, like for example, I think they improved on zone entries. They're still bad at winning that initial faceoff. Unfortunately, winning that initial faceoff is a big piece of power play success because
Sure.
you have the instant possession, you're set up. Sometimes you'll get a chance right off of that. Every time it's cleared, it's going to take you another 20, 25 seconds or so to go in and get set up again. You're not likely. Most teams don't score off the rush on a power play. It's really about going in and getting set up. So winning more initial faceoffs, I think, is something that's a piece of it. Establishing some kind of a net front presence. And this is partially a coaching thing to me, because no matter who's been in net front, they habitually step to the side and look for a tip. And it didn't really work. It didn't work. To me, the focus needs to be on take the goalie's eyes away. Make sure the puck gets on the net. And actually, they were having some success when they were running a double screen. It was Frost in the bumper and usually Farabee right in front of the goalie. It was working for a little bit. It stopped working. They got away from that. But something like that. That's a pretty simple strategy. A double net front. It can work. I think that a lot of these things, are doable. I don't know that creating some kind of power play committee with guys who have power play success in their career is going to be a miracle. Because I look at, what did Adam Oates do? Hall of Famer, one of the all-time great power play players. How good were the Capitals, and the Devils before that when he was their power play coach? They were about 14%, right? Mark Recchi hasn't had a ton of success as a power play coach. When Wayne Gretzky was coaching, he was the head coach, but still had input on the power play. When he was coaching the Coyotes, did they have a great power play? Actually, no, they were near the bottom. So, I think just because a guy had success on the power play in his career, it's not a guarantee of anything. But on the other hand, if you can generate some ideas, we can try this, we can try that, with maybe some more input from the players. I don't know. Again, to me, there's nowhere to go but up. I'm not even asking for 20% next year. I take 17, 18% would be a big improvement.
Oh yeah.
So, just incremental steps, working towards it slowly. I don't know if you're going to get in that kind of real front end kind of talent. And even if you have front end talent, look at Pittsburgh this year, right? They still had Crosby. They still have Malkin, right? They added Erik Karlsson. The majority of the year, they still had Jake Gensel, right? They were just 2 spots above the Flyers.
Yeah.
So it's not talent obviously helps, but it's not all about the talent on your roster. I think a lot of it is in design and execution, and I think there are things that are within their reach that they can improve on next year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we're at time here.
Yep.
I think you got to watch the game. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining. I'll wrap up. I'll do the rest of the segments myself. Thank you so much for joining, man. And I'll reach out to you soon. We'll get you back on here when the schedule allows it.
Yep. Always a pleasure. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you, Bill. All right. So today's episode, lucky to have Bill on. Lost Vasili to power outage. It's just a shit show, but we're going to roll with it. I'm going to go at it alone. And as you guys know, when I've done things by myself, I have no problem talking to myself. So I'm ready to go. I got topics here, so we'll go through those. I'll probably rehash a little bit of what I asked Bill about, share more of my thoughts. So let's get into it. So the Ivan Fedotov thing, I think we talked about it kind of enough. My thoughts on Ivan Fedotov is look, I'm still just open. I'm along for the ride. Right now, I've said it to you guys who have listened to this podcast, which, by the way, most of what Bill said, if you guys really listen to the stuff he said recently, is stuff I've said to you maybe 12 months ago already at this point. If you look at Ivan Fedotov, they, like I said, are waiting for Matvei Michkov. If you look at the way they're structuring contracts, if you look at the way they're structuring their buyouts, if you're looking for the risks, the type of players are going, they recognize that over the next 2 years, that is their opportunity to kind of play around here. I think people are kind of walking into this that Fedotov is not good. We overpaid him. That might be the case. That really might be the case. He might not even be an NHL goalie. That could happen. I think that's probably unlikely, but that could happen. But the lucky thing is, okay, you lose $2 million of cap space, essentially. You have to drop him the minors in his second year of his contract. Peterson at that point is already gone. Maybe even gets bought out this offseason, though I think it's pretty unlikely. And Kolosov steps in, or the Flyers bring in another veteran, like an older guy in his mid-30s, to kind of, stabilize the backup position for a little bit while Ersson continues to do what he's doing. That's all possible. This move is not the end of the world move. I think there's a chance he's going to surprise us. I agree with Bill and I agree with others. Said you really have to throw that 3-game sample size out the window. It's not really going to be beneficial. They didn't give him this contract because of those 3 games. They gave him this contract because of what they've observed over the past, 8 years since they drafted this guy. They know what they drafted. It's his ability to come over here and adapt his game to a smaller rink, to get situated in a new place. At the very least, though, I think he can be an adequate backup. Maybe he'll be an overpaid backup, but you really only have to deal with it for 1 extra year beyond this year. And at that point, again, you bury him in the minors, you eat $2 million. And, that again, there have been worse things that have happened to this franchise. And considering that they're not really pushing it and they're not going to be pushing to be max against the cap when it comes to talent, it still frees up that contract when Michkov is slated to come over here, after these next two drafts, after they continue to clean out, the Cam Atkinsons, some of the older players, Garrett Hathaway will be out of here. There's going to be a substantial amount of cap space at that point after those 2 years, and that'll be kind of probably their real window, unless they find somebody good. And I'm talk about some ideas. I had some stuff I did want to ask Bill, but unfortunately, we scheduled this prior to the Phantoms making the playoffs, so we didn't even know that there would be a playoff game tonight. So it is kind of unfortunate, but I'll get Bill back on and we'll talk about other things in the future. The other piece of news, Joel Farabee is going to play for Team USA in the Worlds. I suspect there might be other players that represent, their country in this offseason. Some of those players that probably are going to get invites are probably going to turn it down due to injuries, Travis Konechny being one of them. I think he'd be better off not playing. He was battling some injuries. Travis Sanheim being another one, Sean Couturier being another one. We'll see what happens. Somebody like Cam York, but he was battling an injury as well. Jamie Drysdale, we know. Like there are other guys here that probably would get an invite, but are probably going to turn it down. Maybe a guy Scott Lawton ends up playing in it. We'll see. I think Tyson Forrester should get a look from Team Canada, to be honest with you, just because of how he played. And that's a guy I would like to actually see continue to play a little bit more. But we'll see. There might be more names out there. Sam Ersson, I think probably should take the offseason off just because of how much he played. But I would imagine Sweden would definitely give him a call. So we'll see if there's other players that are kind of named. The thing I really want to address about the Farabee news, like no surprise there. Team USA could definitely use him. This trade rumor stuff, like yes, there is a word out there by Elliot Friedman. He wonders about Joel Farabee. That's his quote on that one. Look, the way I kind of see it, unless the player wants to leave and unless you are upgrading that position, for instance, you are trading Joel Farabee, most likely an additional asset or two, for somebody like Brady Tkachuk, right? Who brings a physical element that this team desperately needs. Plus, he has a higher ceiling than Joel Farabee, potentially a 100-point player at some point. At least a 90-point player, where Farabee's more in that 70 to potentially 80-point range. You look at the type of season that this guy had. He was third on the team in points. Throughout the first half of it was arguably their most consistent. He's also younger than Frost, Tippett, TK, obviously, Paling, Lawton. He's one of the youngest forwards on the team. He's a year older than Bobby Brink. He struggled a little bit down the line. That's what happens. Again, I don't know where the narrative comes from that players show you who they are when they're 21. I think there's zero truth to that. Even the players who are elite and the best in the league, for instance, Connor McDavid, was his best offensive output in the beginning of his career, or is it now when he's 26, 27? Nathan McKinnon, another guy who falls in. Kucherov, he had great seasons. Funny how at 31, he has his by far best season yet. 100 assists. And is the Tampa the best they've ever been? No. So you can't say it's because, Tampa is the best version of them, so his numbers are inflated. No, he's having the best career or the best season of his career. Because players don't just magically drop off at 31, which again, if you want to go into the Travis Konechny conversation there, this is also why I have no interest in moving Konechny unless the return is a must move. If it's for a slew of assets, you can forget about it. There's 0 point to make that trade. I'm sorry. I don't expect Travis Konechny to talk about how he's going to be re-signing here in the midst of a contract negotiation. It's not his place to talk about it. You can dig into it. You can say maybe he didn't answer it. That's the one thing where, I agree with Bill on where Tortorella drops the ball. But I feel like the media cares way too much about what is said to them. I don't think athletes like majority of media people. I don't think they want to listen to any of those press conferences. Look, I think it can affect them, just like it affects anybody, But I think there's too much weight put on conversations with the media, exit interviews. for the most part, do not care about any of those things. There are times, it's not that I don't care about it, but I just don't put too much weight into it. I definitely care. I watch them. I noticed the way Cam Atkinson talked about the potentially he's not going to be here, right? Like that was definitely hinted in there. There are gleams of truth, but we weigh it so heavily as if the conversations that these people are having with us are the end all be all of the conversation. And I just don't find that. So, and that's why I even look at something like what's being talked about with Farabee. It's like, you have a bunch of people state stuff. You say that, oh, he could be a guy to move. Yeah, but last year you did it to Morgan Frost. And quite frankly, in my opinion, Farabee outplayed Morgan Frost this year, and he's younger. So, like, I just don't see the Flyers jumping to move him. Even Trevor Zegras trade, which I would be very open to a Frost for Zegras trade. But in my opinion, that's an even swap. Like, I'm hearing people talk about, oh, we're going to add. Why? Farabee outproduced him this year. He makes less money than him. He's better defensively than him. He's grittier than him. The value's about equal. Zegras is more dynamic. He's a playmaker. He's a center. But each one of them have their values. And both are young. Like, I expect Trevor Zegras to continue doing what he's doing. Maybe he won't end up doing it in Anaheim, but he is a damn talented player. I wanted to draft him. I really like Trevor Zegras. That is a player I would be open to trading Farabee for. But that's an even swap to me. In the Brady Tkachuk case, you're gonna have to add. I mean, that's also the captain of their team. Plus he's better than both. He's better than Zegras too. The physical element, again, this is a very physical sport, can never be undervalued. So I don't know. I don't really buy the Farabee rumors. Possible. It's always possible. It's possible a ton of players. TK could be moved. So it's possible with a lot of things. Is it likely? I don't think so. I really don't think so. The guy's locked up. He had a career year. He struggled when the rest of the team struggled. I always point that out. Like, people love to pick on a guy that was doing well and that is struggling when everybody's struggling. I don't care. That's like picking on Fedotov when the team in front of him played terrible. He didn't have a great performance, but the team in front of him also didn't play that great. There was only really one of those games. And it's kind of break even at that point because he saved their butt against the Islanders and then, had a shit show game as well. So it's okay. You got to take things in whole. And the same thing with Torts. Like, you can shit on him for what he did at the end when things got the most stressful. But look at everything he kind of set up to that point. Look at the progress that this team has made. Look at the conversation that has changed around the Flyers because of Torts' leadership. And I almost have this like subtle thing where, like, even if you don't think he's right in the moment, which I've brought up, somehow down the line, he tends to be right about a lot of stuff. Do I think he mismanaged the Sean Couturier thing? To some degree, yeah. Because I agree with Bill's take. I said he should have been captain a while ago. You see it in him. I also think that Farabee is captain material. Not at this point in his career, but later in his life, later in his career, I definitely see that from Farabee. So that's also why I don't buy this like, oh, he's got to go. You move. I said the same thing when everybody wanted to trade TK. I just don't see it. I don't see how this stuff is at the top of the list. I don't see why you move Travis Konechny when really he's entering that point now in his career. And if we bring some extra talent, like, you look at guys like Marchand, like, everybody expects that TK is peaked. He is not peaked. He is finally entering to the player he could be. He could end up being he could end up being a 50 goal scorer for all we know. How many people thought Reinhart was going to score 50 plus goals? What do you have, 57 goals this year? Look at his assists. You guys actually think that he's going to be a regular 50 some goal scorer in the league? No, he's like peaking at 29, 30. Like, somebody's going to overpay that guy. Just like the Jeff Skinner, who's still a good player, but, got overpaid for one good year. And we don't have to do that with TK. We can find a nice contract here. And again, if we want to pay him, if we want to give him 6 years, it's going to cost $9 a year probably. If you go 8, you can get that cap probably down a little bit, probably closer to 8. Because he cannot argue by the numbers that he is a top 10 player in the league. you can get him on that, right? But still get him paid. Like you can make the case where it'd be like, well, we're going to pay you slightly more than Sean Couturier, which is about $8 million. So we'll see. I just see the same thing with Farabee. I'm like, I don't know why you'd give up on this kid now unless the trade is like, hey, you're getting something you really need. But if you look at our left side outside of Joel Farabee, and we're converting right wingers to left wingers at this point. He's our best left winger, you know? Um, and I don't think moving Scott Lawton or Noah Cates to that spot is going to do the trick. I would say let the kid build on what he did this year, see if he can do it for a longer span, because that's, 60 to 70 point material right there. If he didn't struggle in that 1 point, I mean, he was on a 70-point pace this year. And I think considering the team struggled in the second half versus the first half, and it's a young team, bank on that. The other piece of news is Vragan is going to Ska, Michkov's team. That is rumored at this point. I don't think that is finalized. I think there is potential that probably will happen. Again, his usage wasn't great where he's playing today. So, we'll see if that one becomes official. I don't think it really changes anything for the Flyers. Again, he's a goalie. They're going to just leave him for a while as it is. They're not going to rush him over here. He's still a kid. So I think it's be awesome if he plays against men, to be honest with you, and kind of follows what Kolosov did and continue to play against men. I guess he already played against men, but they're not associated with the KHL. Let him play against better competition, see how his numbers hold up, because his numbers were out of this world, like first round pick material. We'll see. But I think Zavragin potentially going somewhere else could be good for his career. Having said that, I'm not a huge fan of Rottenberg like most of us, so I don't know if that'll be the best choice, but again, not fully official. So I guess I'll rehash the power play thing. I mean, the Flyers power play being fixed internally. I'll kind of repeat what I said. What Bill is saying. What if you listen to most of the podcasts that I've listened to and they're saying what they said about the power play? This is what I've been saying to you guys since before last season. It is not a talent problem. And when Chuck Fletcher said, "Oh, it's a talent. This is why I traded Jake Voracek for Cam Atkinson. We need different type of," but that was bullshit. I called it out at the time, and like I said today, you want to go get a power play quarterback? Why? Your team doesn't know how to execute on any plan. And I agree. I think Rocky Thompson did do a good job in a lot of ways this year. But the reality is, when I am watching that power play, to me, it is 100% a coaching problem. Your system stinks. Your mentality that you set for your team on the power play stinks. There is plenty of talent for this club to be middle of the road on the power play. Plenty. Travis Konechny, Tippett, York, Forrester, Frost, Couturier, who, by the way, was a 30-plus goal scorer earlier in his career before the injuries. Like, there's plenty of talent to be middle of the road and was damn good on the power play and also played the bumper slot. I called it out over and over again this year that I hated the power play combinations, the way they set them up, the players that they chose to put together. And I hated it from the beginning till the very end. I never bought into whatever they were selling. Almost never. In the way players were used, in the type of freedom that they had. And Bill said it. Simple plays. I've said it over and over again. He said simple plays and shooting. What have I been saying to you guys? And for those who've been listening, they do not shoot enough on the power play, and they spend too much time wasted on the power play where it should be pass, shoot almost every time. And there was almost none of that this year. It was so rare for them to see 1-2 move goal. Like shoot. 1-2 shoot. 1-2 shoot. It was 1-2 double clutch pass, skate around the net, watch, double clutch. That tells me that the system that was in place is not defined well enough. There are not enough plays, or maybe it's not simplified down enough to execute quickly, because that is everything on the power play. It is quick execution and repetition. And people can argue with me about that, but again, tell me that you need to be unpredictable, and I'll show you Alexander Ovechkin's success. What about his game on the power play is unpredictable? Even Giroux, there was nothing unpredictable at Claude Giroux. Literally, hold it against the boards. You have three options: your bumper, Simmons down low, or pass to Jake Voracek, and give and go with the defenseman. It was literally the same shit. Even when it was top 10 in the league, same shit every night. Same. Why couldn't they stop it? It was predictable, right? Because it was systematic and it was quick. It was quick execution. I do believe they can fix it internally. Now, I don't know if it's something that Rocky Thompson's going to be able to do. That's why I wanted a power play specialist to come in. I don't know if any of them are available, but we'll find out pretty soon. And I would say a lot of Rocky Thompson's success as a coach here will rely on that power play. Because while it is important, everything he's done at 5-5, and he's done a good job there, if you cannot fix that power play or even start trending it in the right direction, somebody else can. Someone else can. And it's going to be important to get it there. And even if you add Matvei Michkov, okay, then you're bottom 5. You're still not getting up to the point where you need to be even close to being successful. And it comes from execution. And the plan right now on the power play is not there. I want to see the adjustment. I want to see a whole different mindset on the power play than what I have seen the past 2 years. And I do not want a single excuse about talent. None. Cam York literally ran the power play for the USNTDP. That power play was outrageously good. And it wasn't just talent. They did it against every team every night. How did he know how to run the power play there, but on this team he doesn't know how to run the power play? How does Jamie Drysdale go from being a dynamic offensive defenseman to starting off actually pretty dynamic and then that falling off? They didn't have a good system at all, and it shows because they changed it periodically as the season went on. It would change and shift and change and shift, and it always was a bad solution. It was so rare that I looked at the power play formation. I love Scott Lawton. He's not a power play guy. He's not a great power play guy. You're wasting your time. I like him. He's got some offensive game. Ryan Poehling on the power play. Come on, you're kidding me. I like Ryan Poehling. These are good players. But this is not the way to have a great... I don't care if he's doing better at practice. Build an actual power play unit. You have the assets available. Stop being stubborn. Build a goddamn set of plays and execute on them to perfection. That is how you score on the power play. And stop putting Morgan Frost in front of the net, for God's sakes. You better off with Travis Konechny in front of the net, and he's smaller. It's just why do I know your players better than you do? At least on the power play. Why? I shouldn't. You're smarter than me at hockey. These people know more about hockey than I do. So why am I outsmarting them? Why? That drives me freaking crazy. Anyway, let's move on. So any chances of any young players kind of making an impact? Look, I heard what Danny Briere said in his exit interview. I have to tend to agree with him. Outside of Tuamala, it doesn't seem to be a single forward that's going to be NHL ready. I don't think Denver Barkey's going to get anything but a long look camp. Maybe he gets 9 games, but again, the kid looks like he's 14 years old. They're not going to rush him into the NHL. Bonk is a defenseman, and unless he's coming in here playing top 4 minutes, they're not going to rush him into the NHL. So I would expect both of them potentially to get a 9-game look at most. Probably unlikely, but they probably will stay in camp for an extended period of time. That I can see happening. Getting a long look, probably impressing us, but ultimately not coming down to that. As far as any young players on the Phantoms right now, I mean, Tuamala, who, if he were to continue to build off of everything he did this year and not slow down, I would have said maybe that would have changed. But the fact that he hit kind of a slower skid in the second half, I think we probably expect that he needs at least another half a year in the AHL. Again, he had 43 points, 69 games. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good season. for a guy his age, reminiscent of what Tyson Forrester did. We'll see. He looked really good at camp. I imagine he's going to be one of those first call up guys, regardless. But outside of him, I mean, forward wise, Lixell will still get his opportunities. Avon is not ready, but I expect him to take a bigger role with the Phantoms next year. Yeah, Brink is kind of already with the Flyers. Denoyer is really that only guy, but because he had a down year, unless he's coming in to play on the fourth line, which that could happen. I mean, they're playing Oli Lixell on the fourth line. It's possible, but he's got to have a much better preseason than he did last year. His physical nature, his aggression, and all that. He started playing better towards the end of the year for the Phantoms, and if he has a big playoffs, maybe he'll ride that momentum. He's a guy who needs a big offseason. I mean, really, it's just between him and Tuamala who even stand close to a chance. Um, as far as anybody part of that group, the defense itself, I mean, obviously Ronnie Adder is going to have to be there in the mix. I assume Yitting is going to get re-signed. We don't know yet. There's also rumors he's going to go overseas, back to Sweden. I don't know, just because he got a taste. He might not want to run away quite yet. He's still relatively young. He's going to be another guy in the mix. But let's be honest, we all know that everybody's going to have their eyes on Emil Andre going into next season. He has by far the highest upside of all three of those players, including Helge Grans, who probably will get a long look. But it's really just up to Emil Andre at this point. But if you look at the players available right now for the Flyers, barring something to change, Emil Andre really has to battle Igor Zamula for that spot, which, look, that might happen. Andre might take Zamula's spot. Zamula might be relegated down. We assume that Ristolainen will be back, so maybe it'll be an Andre Ristolainen pairing. I don't know. I really don't know at this point. I think there are going to be some changes coming. So young player wise, it's really just that. And I expect Kolosov to get a long look at camp, but ultimately it looks like they kind of made their decision already. So I would just expect the goaltending situation to be what it is, but that's not a bad thing. It's good to know what those roles are going into the season. And barring anything will change, having Kolosov and Peterson, you know, it is what it is. Kolosov obviously will probably get an opportunity, but he's pretty young. But he did play against men. I could see him getting some games. He's going to get a long look at preseason, that's for sure. Him and Fedotov are going to get a majority of the preseason games, in my opinion. In the early rounds of the preseason, they'll get long looks, both of them. Fedotov for an adjustment, and Kolosov to see kind of where he is after the offseason, because he's really the one that's going to have the largest growth spurt. Peterson, you already know what he is. They'll probably try to get him to the Phantoms as soon as possible to just get him playing. So off season, look, I was taking a look at free agency. This was something I wanted to ask Bill, but again, didn't have the time today, and I don't have Vasili to bounce this off of. But I brought up the Pietrangelo trade opportunity. The reason I bring it up is I look at a team that's really, really up against the cap. They got a 33-year-old defenseman in Pietrangelo's got 3 more years at $8.8 million. It's going to be tough to move that cap in a sense. Having said that, he's probably a valuable commodity. The Flyers do have some cheaper defensemen. I look at that as an opportunity. That's all. And I think if you have an opportunity to bring in a guy the caliber of Pietrangelo, I see it similar to when they brought over Chris Pronger. Maybe there is an option there to bring a guy like that over. I think that would be a nice addition. Now, the other X factor I was kind of looking at, and I don't know how likely this is at all, and I don't even know if he'd be interested in coming here just because of where he is in his career and his age. Actually, let me double check his age. I'm pretty sure he's 29. Yes, he's 29 years old. So somebody I would look at and be interested in is Elias Lindholm. Now, he is playing with Vancouver in the playoffs. Vancouver did trade for him. He did not have a ton of success over there. And just to break down the numbers, again, he had 12 points in 26 games. He was a -6. He had 32 points in 49 games. So he did not have, I guess, his typical, point 7, 0.8 points per game kind of pace that he was on in Calgary. He's definitely seen somewhat of a dip. He had kind of a high, jump there at 27. He scored 42 goals. or 26. He had 42 goals, 40 assists. I was on that line that was just kind of rocking and rolling. He was at 9 playoff points in 12 games. So like his value is an all-time high. His value has kind of dropped since then, I would say. But he is a playmaker first, and that is something this team needs. And because of the lack of, large highlighted season, there might be an opportunity to sign a guy like that for a relatively affordable price. Now, you would probably still have to move a player out, Cam Atkinson being one of those guys. And I don't know if the Flyers are going to be jumping and bringing over a guy at 29, but I do like Lindholm. I like his game, and he's a guy who kind of needs to reprise his career slightly here. He had kind of a down year. So, and even a down year, the previous year from his previous year, right? He went from scoring 42 goals to 22 goals the following year. And I look at a guy like that potentially playing center with somebody like Konechny. That might be what you really need to kind of allow Konechny to flourish offensively, is bring in an established playmaking center. And I think there is an opportunity for that. Do I think it's likely? No, not really. But I do think it's interesting. And he's a guy who I kind of looked at as like, well, Vancouver has the money. Why wouldn't they re-sign him? But at the same time, did he have enough success to stay in Vancouver? I don't know. I think they'll probably explore their options outwardly. Having said that, he's going to have his pick of the litter of teams that need centers. I mean, Colorado obviously traded for Casey Middlestat, but that number 2 center spot for, I guess, a more elite team is highly valuable. Even a team like Tampa, like maybe they walk away from Steven Stamkos, and they bring in a guy like Lindholm and be like, well, on our team, he's going to be an 80-point player, right? So, because they have a stunning offense over there, and Stamkos still had 40 goals this year. Stamkos is a different caliber player than Lindholm, even Lindholm's prime, but still. I just thought he was an interesting player. I think the Flyers, just looking at free agency, there are going to be some names out there that are going to be interesting, to look at as things move forward. Because I think while the initial wave, a lot of these guys will end up getting locked up to probably monster deals. After that, the prices drop dramatically. And players that you thought maybe weren't going to be available might be available on a short-term deal. Now I don't think Lindholm is going to take a short-term deal, but if anybody, even in his 30s, that has the capabilities, like even Marchessault, which I don't think he's going to come here, but he does have a cup. He's not necessarily what the Flyers need, but I'm just saying guys of like that level. Marchessault is, I think, 33. He's at the end of his career, but he's still got it. Somebody like that, if they'll come over and take like a 1-year deal, I think the Flyers would be interested in bringing something like that over. Again, as long as it fits within that 2-year window. After that, they're going to want cap space cleared out. They're not going to want any long-term deals. I cannot see that happening unless they really believe that that guy is going to be part of this core moving forward, like Konechny is, who is, I could see him getting, a 6 to 8-year deal. And I think they should give it to him, quite frankly. And unless you're getting like a top 5 pick or an equal or a prospect that has a very high ceiling, like a Cutter Gauthier for Travis Konechny, I think I'd be open to that. But I really don't see the Flyers doing that either. I think the Flyers love Konechny's game. I think they love his attitude. I think they see him as one of the leaders of the team, and he's still young enough to grow with this core. He is, 2 years older than Tippett. Like, he's not an old man. He's got 6 years left of prime years. And that's if he doesn't take care of himself. He probably has 7. So you have to probably give him that 8th year. But I think TK is absolutely worth keeping with this group as you add to it. Unless there is kind of a no-brainer. But if you're going to just trade him for pieces, I think it's a mistake. Just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Again, hit the notification bell for notifications for our YouTube channel. Go to Spotify and iTunes and follow us there as well. If you can continue to give us ratings, you guys have been awesome so far. Ratings are definitely high. Would love to keep them high or make them higher in iTunes case. Again, all a tremendous help to us. I would really appreciate that. So we'll talk about a little bit of the draft, and then we'll talk about the Phantoms a little bit. I don't have too much to say just because I have nobody else to, kind of work off. Some of this stuff I wanted to ask Bill, but again, our show kind of got derailed um, as far as getting his opinions. But we'll see because the playoffs are playing out right now. So as far as the draft goes, you know, I don't have a strong opinion right now. From what I can tell, none of these guys from 2 to 13, which are the players that are being named, I don't even know if that's accurate, to be honest with you. None of those guys are a breakaway, clear cut number two, or from what I can tell, even a top 10. Like most of these lists are completely inconsistent. And outside of Celebrini, he's really the only one. So I feel like the Flyers really can't go wrong here. And regardless, they're going to take best player available. Hopefully, we can draft a guy that we legitimately need, which, quite frankly, is still a defenseman. We can always use top defensemen, always, because we don't have enough of that here, especially on the left side. And then a centerman. Is there a player to convert to a centerman? That's always possible. I would just wait until we get closer to the draft. We'll have a much better idea of what the rankings are because I find that they fluctuate, even minor fluctuations as the season ends. Some of these guys are playing tournaments, playoffs, and a lot of this stuff is not made by NHL scouts, right? And the scouting of a team is going to be different, right? Every year we see surprises. Every year we see some teams are higher than others. Sometimes players that get taken in the top really aren't even that good. And there are better players later in the draft, which I think the positive of all this is the Flyers will have 2 chances to walk away with a first round pick. Now, back in the day, they used to nail these, like nail them. They missed on Jay O'Brien when they took Farabee. That's a big miss. You're supposed to hit these. And the fact they have back-to-back first-round picks, they need to hit them. And that means they need to be good to great players. And that's what they used to do back in the day. This is not the best of drafts. I've heard that before. I don't care. There are great players in every draft. Okay, just because it's not a franchise player staring you in the face outside of Celebrini, who, quite frankly, seems like he's also not a franchise player. He seems more of just like an all-star caliber guarantee, where the other guys, nobody really knows. They're 18 years old. I'd be really happy with Aginla. I'd be happy with Hellenius, Catton, Boynum, or Boyum. I'm Israeli. I can't even say his name right. But again, Salayev, I'd be happy with Eiserman to get a high-end goal scorer. I mean, our goal here is just to add the best player available. I don't know who that will be. Nobody thought it was Cutter Gauthier when we drafted him. We were high on him, but all of a sudden now he's like a franchise caliber player in people's eyes. So I would ignore a lot of couch scouts. Some are right, some are spot on, but you're really not going to know, and it's hard because it's just a hard thing to do to predict the 18-year-old player's success in the NHL. So don't freak out too much no matter what happens. But the Flyers really need to hit on this. And if they can get lucky and hit on a guy, it's kind of where I'm like a little more interested in a European player like Hellenius. Apparently he's less dynamic, but getting a guy over here early, playing for the Phantoms would interest me. Like even a guy like Eiserman, he is not European, but he's an NCAA player. I don't want to deal with that anymore either. He's going to be playing for BU next year. So I believe he's committed to BU already. So we'll see. I would just hold it, with a grain of salt. Like on Tankathon right now, they have the Flyers taking Hellenius. Who knows? And then their second pick, which is at this point number 30, we don't really know what it'll be. It depends on when Florida exits the playoffs. But the other one is a defenseman in Charlie Ellick. Maybe. It's like so hard to predict these. And unless there's like a clear cut tier, which this year there does not seem to be, it's going to be really hard to predict anything. Because it also depends on what those teams' needs are and what they value the most at that time. Because if you have a mix of, 2 to 12 that are all comparable players, teams are going to be going off a need to some degree, right? If they're all about the same, or you have a group of guys about the same, you're going to go for what you need. You either need a defenseman or a center. Let's be honest. You can convert centers to wingers. Most teams are not like putting a winger above a center or defenseman unless they are clearly better, like what we did with Mitchkov, right? Like he was the second best player, most talented player in the draft. So, the value supersedes that. Um, Maybe a guy like Demidov will drop that much just because of the Russia factor. I don't think so, but you never know. Um, I think we'd all love to walk away with a guy like a Ginla just for the name alone. But maybe that's not really what the Flyers need. So I would just be pretty confident in Brent Flair. I mean, he's done a pretty good job. Um, but we definitely need some size up front, and we need a centerman, and we could also use another great defenseman. So all three of those things are high on the list. So let's just hope we get two of three in this first round. That's really like the Flyers got Mitchkov and got Bonk, right? Defense, offense, check. I would recommend that they do that again this year, unless best player available is not really the case. But again, this is a defense heavy draft. You better walk away with a defenseman in that first round. Most likely your second pick. First round, I guess, and actually, I don't know that, but you better walk away with at least one defenseman, one forward from this draft, because that's really what you need, and they better both hit because it's still an important draft. And next year is going to be even more important because that is a stronger draft, so that means it's more predictable, and predictability leads to better drafting success. All right, I'll wrap here up on the Phantoms. So the Phantoms start their playoff tonight. We lost Bill to that. He's going to be covering the game. Let's see if I can even look up the score. I'm sure the game has started already. I was shocked that they were even in the playoff mix at this point because, they had such a mediocre year. But then when you see like 80% of the league makes the playoffs, it's kind of like, okay. Having said that, they got a lot of talent back from the Flyers towards the end of the year. And, it paid off at least somewhat at the end. They won some important games for themselves. And I'll tell you right now, as we're watching, Wilkes-Barre Scranton is clearly the superior team in the standings, but they are beating the Pens 1-0 in the first. A goal by Adam Brooks, assisted by Yitting and Louis Belpedio. So they're going all out. They went with 11 forwards and 7 defensemen tonight. Makes sense considering, kind of where the team is. And I'll say this. I think Lappy has a chance of redemption here if they can have some playoff success, at least in my eyes. Because if he can at least get them to play when the games really matter, I think it can compensate for the fact that they kind of underperformed this year as a team. Not so much offensively, but like as a unit, defensively, winning tight games. They had a lot of blowouts, a lot of games where their offense just didn't show up. And their defense didn't show up too. So it's just like, and they just blame goaltending, but I'm like, skeptical. My thoughts are, I was looking at the Phantoms already for next year, and it's pretty barren. Because I don't know what's going to happen with Taylor Lazinski or Adam Brooks, who I suspect will get re-signed here, but I don't know if Lazinski will. And, they have some players coming over, like Eklund, and obviously Massimo Rizzo was added. But, they might lose some players to the Flyers. They're gonna have to re-up again. You see how successful some of these other teams are year after year after year. The Phantoms really have not found that stride. So I'd love to see them start it in this playoff run. And so far with a 1-0 lead, I mean, I'll take it. It's a lot better than being down. We'll see how they do through. Right now, it's the end of the first period as I record this, so we'll see how they do throughout the rest of that game. But if they can steal this first game, that's pretty crucial, especially because they're outmatched. At least standing wise. But I was expecting more from the Phantoms this year. We didn't necessarily get it. And it's one of those things, kind of like Thompson. It's like, okay, but like, was it a coaching issue? Is it something that it can be internally resolved? Lappy's still a pretty young coach. do you give him the benefit of the doubt too that he could turn this around as well, that he's building on something, that he's learning from it? We'll see. It's going to be a long off season. I'll say this. So hopefully the Phantoms can make an actual stretch run out of this, because it's going to be a crazy off season. I expect the Flyers to add a bunch of players, probably not anything top, but there's going to be some movement for sure. Um, I can't see this being a quiet off season, like I was telling Bill. We might see kind of a different team than what we saw this past year, um, at least in some of the areas where there is movement. But I'm still not on the trade Farabee train, and it doesn't make sense to me. Again, it would, if he moves, is because Farabee doesn't want to be here. Otherwise, I don't get it. I don't understand what more you wanted from the guy. You were satisfied with the Owen Tippett season, but you're not satisfied with Farabee's season, who had pretty much the same point pace, and at one point was like tied with him in goals. It's just like he's a year and a half younger. Like, I don't know. I don't see it. It just seems like a lot of internet recency bias. And I just don't think that way. Again, he could be traded, but I wouldn't be on my list. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here just because I don't have a co-host today, and my guest wasn't able to stay that long. So I'm going to wrap it up today, just slightly under an hour and a half here. Again, thank you everybody for listening. Really appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome. All the eyes and ears that we get throughout the year. Again, we'll be going all off season. Maybe we might miss an episode for a week if we're on vacation. Maybe both of us are on vacation. Summer kind of tends to do that. But outside of that, we're just going to be continuing strong, and we're going to do like end of season grades and all that. We'll have a bunch of off season topics that we kind of recycle, and hopefully the Flyers give us some more interesting stuff to talk about. But for now, we got to kind of wait out the Stanley Cup here. And again, I'll have Steve back on for post lottery. So when we know when the Flyers will be picking, and then we'll have him on after the draft as well, to review who the Flyers got. So again, shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. They will be open March 1st. May 1st. Again, they've been closed for almost 2 years. So it's a big reopening for them. So make sure to get a cheesesteak from them when they reopen on May 1st. And also a shout out to Public Summit Adjusters. Have them check your insurance company because they will make the adjustments needed, and you can trust on them to do so. Again, I am making these scripts up as I go along, but that is what they do. You can reach them at 215-752-0560. Again, thank you all so much. Thank you so much for listening. We love you. And remember, always stay